Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy. This is the Lionsteel BestMan. That's a single word, like Batman, except I guess better. Either way. There you go. Next thing, I want to thank my buddy Pete over at Cedric A to Gear and Outdoors for, basically, I was making an order already with collected knives. He said, hey Nick, would you pick one of these guys up for me? And, send me the cash and whatnot. But he gave me full permission to carry it, use it, etc. That's a beautiful thing, and so thank you much for that, Pete. Next thing, size comparison. Here it is against, if I can find it, this Spyderco Delica. Here we go. Spyderco Delica, Spyderco PM2. So you can see here, this is not a large knife, particularly. But in terms of usable blade length, we're in the same vicinity as a Delica. Here it is against a Ontario Rat number 2. And so you can see, actually, blade profile is not so far different. Well, except for all the differences. That's a smart statement. And then here it is against a couple of the slip joints you've seen in my collection before. This is a JE-made modernized slip joint. This is the GEC number 99 pattern. So you can see, actually, very, very similar overall size and whatnot here. And then this little guy is not a slip joint, but it is perhaps one of my more traditional style knives. This is a Pena Knives front flipper trapper, done up in traditional trappings. Oh, God, I didn't even mean to make that pun, but here we are. Anyways, it's getting worse. So there we go. Next thing, this is one of what seems to be an increasing trend these days of modern traditional knives. At Blade Show 2019, there were a lot of people showing off really cool modern traditionals, and so I'm very much liking that, and this is one of the entries from Lionsteel. They really do seem to be going all in on the modern traditional market, both in some of their collaborations with Collector Knives, which is a smaller dealer here in the States. This is the Bolus, I believe. But they're also doing some of these things on their own. This is a separate independent thing that you can get in a variety of retailers. And so I'm kind of liking seeing that. And then finally, there will be no disassembly for this because a number of people have warned me against it. And one person very specifically is trying to get me to do it. And I know he's trying to troll me, so no. No, Chris, no. But anyways, so there's no disassembly here. Very often slip joints are very, very painful to disassemble unless they are very well designed for it. But nevertheless, that is something to keep in mind. So let's go on ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife right here. To start with, on the good side, look, I love the modern traditional idea because modern knives have some amazing things like stainless steels with great wear resistance and things like that. Titanium, all sorts of really screw-based construction. All of those things are a beautiful thing, and it's something I'm really enjoying seeing out there in the world. And so I'm thrilled to see Lionsteel going, at least if not all in, partially in on that. That's a great idea, and it's awesome. Next thing, this guy has a half stop, as you can see here. If you are opening this guy up, or closing it, for that matter, you will absolutely hit this little half stop here, which stops the blade. This is a bit of a safety measure. For instance, if you are cutting with it and the blade starts to shut, it should stop there before it comes collapsing onto your hand. So that's a nice little detail, and it's a good idea, especially given the fact that the pull on this isn't super strong. Next thing, the pull, of course, being the spring force coming from the back spring there. So that's something to keep in mind. Next thing, you've got a lot of good material options here. This right here is the olive wood, but they also offer a Santos wood, which I'd actually never even heard of as a tree, but whatever. It's got ebony as well, and you can get a bunch of different micatas on there, which are all beautiful. And, it's using titanium as well, which I like very much as a metal, makes things relatively lightweight. Speaking of which, I should throw this guy on the scale here. And we are coming in here at 2.32 ounces for, let's see here, a little bit under 3 inches. So that's a pretty good weight. This is a light little knife, and it's much lighter than some of the equivalent traditionals you'll see out and about, even, with full titanium scales and things like that. Pardon me. So there you go. Next thing, this is using the wood here. And in fact, like I said, there are a couple of different wood options. And wood actually, as well as slip joint style knives, are a beautiful thing socially speaking. What I mean by that is that there are many people in the world who are a little bit afraid of knives as tools. For instance, if you open up a box or something at work and you pull out a pocket knife, there are some people who might be afraid of that. But one thing I've noticed over and over again is that wooden scales calm them. Like, for whatever reason, if you see wood in the handle of a knife, this is a little Maserati serene, but anytime you see wood, it suddenly makes things way, way less scary to them. And so actually having that wood option is very nice. This feels, although very, very different from Grandpa's knife, it feels like it could have been Grandpa's knife, and that actually can be a major factor for some. Mind you, there are people who are going to be scared of anything, so it's not a guarantee, but that can definitely be nice, and it makes this sort of a classy knife. It makes it something that's maybe a little bit more suitable for a boardroom than some of your crazy high-speed, low-drag options out there in the world. I mean, your Spyderco Native Chief is not exactly the same much of a boardroom knife as this little guy. So that's a nice thing. Next thing, price-wise, we're coming in here at $140. It's up there, but it's honestly not that far above a lot of the modern, or a lot of the traditionals that are available regularly. And that's a beautiful thing. So I think the price is fine. Next thing, the availability seems to be reasonably good. That is one of the biggest problems with the traditional market right now. Like Great Eastern Cutlery, they do a drop of them, and they're sold out within 10 minutes, and 90% of them are on eBay the next day at twice the price. I mean, there are a lot of ugly availability issues in the traditional market, and this doesn't appear to suffer from those. So right there, they are well positioned to just take over the traditional market as soon as they get that, up and running. So that's a good thing. Next thing, there is also a two-blade option for this guy. I decided not to pick it up because it basically requires you to be using nail nicks. I really hate nail nicks. I tend to prefer a knife that you can just pinch open here. That just makes things a lot easier for me, but the two-blade thing is definitely an option if you want a knife with two blades. That can be kind of helpful, too. And then finally, the ergonomics on this are surprisingly good. I mean, in surface, it's kind of a rectangle, right? But actually, it works pretty well. You can see they've rounded some of these liners. I mean, overall, things are relatively good in the hand. And it's actually more ergonomic than you might think. And so for me, at least, that all is the good. The ergos are very solid. It has a two-blade option if you'd like. It's all titanium, so it's very lightweight. It's $140. Wood is a really nice option for non-threatening sort of situations. And there are lots of material options for you out there. There is a half stop, and I do love that modern traditionals are now a thing. On the great side, the blade of this is magnificent. It's a great blade. It's a great freaking blade. It's M390, and I did some cardboard cutting with it. It's absolutely good to go for my life. I have no problem with the performance, at least in my everyday life for this little guy. It has a sharpening choil, which is a beautiful thing. You can see there, it is absolutely there, and it covers the entire plunge. No argument there. But most importantly, the best part of this knife is that it is ground like a traditional. Sometime back, I took a review of the Lionsteel Roundhead, which was a collaboration with Collector Knives, and it was nice in a lot of ways, but unfortunately, the blade was ground still super thick. It was ground like a modern pocket knife. And unfortunately, that's been an issue with Italy very often. A lot of Italian knives have needlessly thick grinds for some reason. But this is not a problem. The edge of this knife is ground beautifully. It comes to a very, very thin edge. So this thing freaking cuts like crazy. I mean, oh my God, does this thing cut. Oh, yeah. It cuts beautifully, and so I love this blade. This is so much better than the Roundhead. This, frankly, all of Lionsteels should be ground this way. Okay, maybe not this thin, depending on your big old freaking integrals, whatever. But nevertheless, I want to see these kinds of thin grinds from Lionsteel in the future. It is so refreshing to see them coming out with this, and this makes their traditional, modern traditionals in the future way more appealing to me. If this kind of blade can be bought in other handles, oh yes, Lionsteel, oh yes. So to me, that's what's great, is this blade is 100% amazing. I love this freaking blade. On the bad side, it didn't come really super sharp. I mean, a good grind is great, and certainly a dull blade that's thin behind the edge will do a little better, but still. There was definitely a burr on there. A couple of passes on I used a Spyderco Golden Stone, but whatever. It knocked that off very quickly, and it got the sharp, and then it stropped up beautifully. So, but it didn't come super sharp. A little disappointing, but then again, I'm a sharpness snob. Next thing, this is definitely not designed for disassembly. This has been the issue with Lionsteel's integrals before, or I'm sorry, Lionsteel's the traditionals before, but yeah, that's definitely not a great thing. I do like a traditional that's designed to be taken apart effectively. It has two pivots here. Now, I get that some of these are actually two pivot knives, because you've got the other version with the two blades, but it's a little lazy to have the two pivots on both when there's just one blade. I'm not a big fan of that. Next thing, this does have a relatively light back spring action. conclusion, I tend to prefer slip joints that have, a much stronger pull. Because when you are actually closing and opening, or I'm sorry, when you're actually using the guy, the pull is what keeps the blade in place. Whereas on this guy, it is just not nearly as strong. It's fairly easy to move this guy around. This can be actually a good thing, particularly if you have like mobility issues. Having a relatively light pull can be a nice thing. But honestly, I really prefer a heavier pull, and especially given that this has no like surface, I tend to like a traditional knife that has some kind of a kick down here. So if I put my finger there, this is actually a lockback, so it doesn't really matter. This guy here has a little kick, so if I'm really concerned, I can put my finger here, and this won't close onto my finger because the dull part is resting against it already. Whereas this guy has no such thing. In fact, the blade is a good ways above my finger. So there's really no place for this to close but onto my finger, and that makes it just a little bit, this kind of handle design coupled with the back spring is a little creepier to use on a regular basis than some of the slip joints I prefer. For a lot of people, that doesn't bother them, and for light boxes and envelopes kind of cutting, this really shouldn't be a problem, but I do tend to like a heavier pull and some kind of an area that rests against the finger just to make that a non-issue. So there's that. Next thing, the pinch open on this guy is not amazing. You can definitely do it, but it needs a little bit more access. I feel like I would probably end up carving like an easy open notch or something into this, but oh yeah. You can do it, but it's not great. I tend to prefer something where you've got all kinds of, blade space on there to grab on. It's something to keep in mind. Then finally, on the bad side, nothing on this knife really aligns with anything else on this knife. Because you have, for instance, rounded corners in the titanium here. You've got the inlays here kind of stick out past the titanium here, but they're actually a little lower than the titanium here, and then over here, this corner is sticking up further, and then if we look at the backspacer here, the backspacer is actually sort of a separate crowned thing that's sandwiched between two crowned things here, but it's not quite the same height between the backspacer and the ridge on that side as it is on this side, and so one side, and then, similarly, these edges right here, none of this really aligns. Everything is like kind of stacked. It's just weird. It feels like it's kind of a Lego knife in a lot of ways. That's not fair. I mean, it's much better built than, that, but it feels like all of these pieces have just kind of been slapped together and then screwed together, and then there's your knife. There is no feeling of like, I don't know. If you look at some of your classical traditionals, things are relatively flush on the back there. Again, this is completely flush. Everything aligns beautifully. And, this is maybe a little unfair because this is a much more expensive custom traditional style knife. But again, all of these things are perfectly smooth across. You can not even feel some of these inlays here. Whereas this has these big gaps. It has these corners that are sticking up. It has all of these different surfaces that are variably mated at different heights. I'm just not super impressed with the cohesiveness of this. It feels like this is a knife that is made up of many different parts, rather than a knife where those parts are aligned, and especially given that on a traditional you can do that beautiful thing on the back where everything is to a flat surface. They didn't do that here, and that's a little disappointing. So to me, on the bad side, nothing really aligns in the knife. It feels like this is made of a bunch of disparate pieces that they kind of grabbed and threw together. The pinch open is a little touch and go. It is a relatively light pull. It's got two pivots and has one blade. It's not designed for disassembly, and it didn't come super sharp. On the ugly front, the thing that is ugly to me about this knife are these gaps right here. So in practice, if we look at the corner here, I'll try and zoom in a little bit. If we look at this little corner right here, you can see that there are it looks a lot like gaps. Now, in practice, these gaps aren't actually very big. I'm not saying these are like huge, oh my god, terrible gaps, but the thing is, if you look at this guy from any degree of distance, it really feels like there are gigantic cracks to either side because they've chamfered the titanium going into the inlay, and they've very, very slightly, but just barely chamfered the inlay approaching the titanium. So what you have here is something that looks very gappy, even though there aren't really strong gaps. And if you compare that to something where the inlays are done very flush, like for instance on this little guy right here, you can see if you run your finger across there, there's just no gap there. And so that's honestly disappointing. It really feels like these inlays are tacked on in a way that you don't very often get in other traditional knives. And I'm not super impressed by that. So, to me at least, I find that very ugly. The fact that they chamfer the titanium and then kind of, I guess, chamfer the wood, although it feels like some of the ones have been chamfered and some of the corners not so much. It just ends up feeling like the knife was sort of thrown together and that the inlays don't really fit well. And then with the corners and whatnot, not very impressed with the inlay work. And so to me, I'm going to put that as ugly because it's pretty unimpressive. So anyways, there you go. Final conclusion. This blade, The blade, this part right over here, I freaking love. This is a really, really nice blade. It has the idea of a thinly ground M390 blade is amazing, and this is well implemented. I like this blade a lot. And it is a thrill for me to see Lionsteel putting in the grinding effort. I hope it is a long-term pattern of them making not only their modern traditionals, but also the rest of their damn knives really ground thinly to cut. Because, oh man, is that a way that Lionsteel can differentiate itself, both in Italy and around the world. This is a really, really great grind, and I love seeing it. The handle it's in does have some perks as well, with solid ergos, lots of choices, a two-blade option, and a price that's not out of line completely. However, it is not perfection. It has a relatively light pull. It's got a so-so pinch open experience. There is no alignment among a lot of the many pieces, and there were ugly gaps at the inlays. I kind of feel like my conclusion on this guy is that Lionsteel has, in some ways, they've learned the most important lesson of traditional knives, which is thin stock and thin grinds. Very often, and I'll admit this myself, I mean, I started in the knife game with a bunch of, big old, modern knives, and when I finally handled, some traditionals, it was just like, oh my God, these things cut super well. And that's because the stock is thin and the grinds are thin. That's something that a lot of modern knife making just doesn't do. And so I love that they have found that they are doing that. That's bringing me great joy. And as a result of this blade right here, their traditional lineup is 100% on my radar. And as they keep doing different handles that maybe appeal to me more, oh man, am I interested. But it also feels like they're missing some of the other lessons that make traditionals traditional, right? Because there were amazing handle patterns out there, and I don't really feel like this is one of them. A good traditional also has that feeling of being kind of tight, right? Where everything is smooth and gapless and whatnot, where you run your finger along and it's just like everything is put together tightly. Even on this guy, everything is put together well. And honestly, if it's not going to be disassembled, you might as well freaking pin it shut and do that, either way. I feel like they're missing some of those. It feels like a point of pride on some of the traditional knives that everything is beautifully smooth, that everything is just beautifully joined and whatnot, and this is absolutely the opposite of that. This feels like everything is not smooth, everything is not joined, everything is just sort of thrown together. And that's not something I particularly appreciate. I really hope that in the future, maybe they'll consider just, putting all this titanium together and then just put it on the grind, like, and get yourself down to a beautiful little thing like that. That would be really nice. I think that would class this knife up substantially. If they got rid of some of these gaps, even just like at the back of the blade here, it would have been so easy to just have this chamfer go into that one, but no, like, why? So I don't know. I mean, to me, that feels like another lesson from traditionals that is yet for them to learn. And it kind of bugs me at a very real, completely irrational level. So, like I said, final conclusion, this is absolutely a wonderful blade. I love this blade so damn much. And the knife itself is quite nice. And I think it is going to be a good option for a modern traditional knife if you're loving this pattern, if you're loving the look. And if none of those things I was just talking about, because I'm crazy and picky, bother you, then this is going to be excellent. And it's also a serious sign of progress from Lionsteel. I love seeing this. I loved seeing it at Blade Show. I am very, very happy about this blade. So, there you go. If you're loving the look, and you don't mind any of the other stuff I was talking about, for you, this knife might be the best, man. Or woman, I suppose. Anyways, there you go. Hope this was interesting to you. Good job on the blade, Lionsteel. Keep up the good work, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.